Today's shiur begins from the second line from the top of Daf Kuf Yud Beis. Before we begin the actual Gemara, on the side you can see we have written the topic heading, Haktonas Peros Gedolim, large fruits that became reduced in size. The Gemara opens with an incident, with a story. Rabbi Chelbo, Rabbi Avira, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Iklu Lahu Asra, they arrived at a certain place, they went to a certain place. Aisu Kamaihu Afarsika, they were presented with an afarsa is a type of fruit, Dava Ki Ilfis Kfar Hino, that was the size of an Ilfis Kfar Hino. Kfar Hino is the name of a place, and Ilfis is a pan or a pot. The Ilfis Kfar Hino Kamahave, how big is an Ilfis Kfar Hino? Chamisha Sa'in, 5 sa'ah. Now, 5 sa'ah, that's a measure. You can rest assured that that's a very large measure for one fruit. Achlu shlish, they ate a third of it. Vifkiru shlish, and disowned, declared unowned a third. V'nosnu lifnei behemton shlish, and they fed their animals a third. Lishana, a year later, Ikla Rebbe Ozer lahasam v'aisu lekamei. He arrived there and they presented him with an afar sake. Noktoi biodei, he held it in one hand. Viomar, and the idea of holding it in one hand indicates it's much smaller than the 5 saw of the previous year. And Rebbe Ozer said, Eretz pri limlecha meiras yoshvei ba. The land of great fruits has turned to salt because of the wickedness of its inhabitants. What's interesting here is that in 1 year, such a significant decrease in size, that's something worth noting, and he attributes it to sinning. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi ikla legavla. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi arrived in a place called Gavla. Chazinu lano tufi dahavu kaimi ki igli. He noticed some grape clusters that appeared as calves. Omar agolim bein hagfanim. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asked, "What do you have? You have calves that are wandering amongst the vines?" Amru lei. They told him, "Ktufi ninu." There are no calves there. Those are grape clusters. Omar, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, upon hearing this description of fantastically large grape clusters, he says, Eretz, Eretz, achnisi perosayach. He appeals to the land, and he says, withdraw your fruits. Lemiata motzia perosayach. For whom are you producing these fruits? La'aravayim halalu shamdu aleinu b'chatosenu. For these Arabs that have taken over the land because of our sins. Lishana, a year later, Ikla Rabbi Chia lahasam Chazinu dahav kaimi karizi. Rabbi Chia noticed clusters appearing as goats. Omar izim bein hakfanim. He asked, you have goats wandering amongst your vines? Amrulei, he said, Zio, go, lo tavid lon ki chavroch. We don't want you to do like your colleague did the year before. Tanu Rabbanan. Before we continue with the Gemara, we have a topic heading, and it reads, Cheshbon, a calculation, laharois sheretz Yisrael bizman brocha, the land of Israel, at the time of blessing, the time of plenty, sa'ah oise chameshes ribo kurin. The saw is a measure. It represents a measure. Sometimes it's a measure reference, as it will be in this case, a measure of land, a base saw. Base saw is an area of land in which you can plant a saw of seeds. So if you plant a saw of seeds in the area, Eretz Yisrael in the time of bracha would produce 50,000 kur. If you bear in mind that 1 kur is 30 sa'ah, so you have 50,000 kur, and you would multiply that by 30. you would get a very large increase of how much seed you put in initially to what it actually produces. We also have a long point marking, so take note of that as well. Tonu Rabbanan, b'virchisel shel Eretz Yisrael, in the time of blessing of the land of Israel, Beisa Oisa Chameshes Ribo Kurim. A Beisa of land would produce 50,000 kur. Chameshes is 5, Ribo is 10,000. So 5 times 10,000, 50,000 kur. B'yeshivasa shel Tzoyan, Tzoyan is a place in Mitzrayim, and it's considered a very lush place in Mitzrayim. So in the time of Tzoyan's habitation, Beis Sa'ah Oisa Shivim Kurim. One Beis Sa'ah would produce 70 kur. To give, again, this is to give you a feeling of let's say, a perspective. The normal production of a very lush area, for one saw, you get 70 kur. The Sanya, Omar Rabbi Meir, Ani Reisi, Bebikas Beishan, I saw in the valley of Beishan. And Beishan in this Gemara is a reference to some place outside of Israel. Beisa Oisa Shivim Kurim. That a Beisa would produce 70 kur. So on Mitzrayim, which was a lush area, could be assumed to produce certainly no less than 70 kur. There isn't a more plentiful, lush area than the land of Egypt. Shenemar Gan Hashem Keretz Mitzrayim. The land of Egypt is considered like the Gan Hashem, the garden of the Almighty. And within Egypt, there isn't a greater place, more productive place than Tzoan. That was a place that kings were raised. The ministers were in Tzoan. And there isn't a poorer, a rockier, non-arable area in Israel more than Hebron. The Havu Kavri Bo Shichvi, it was known as a place of burying the dead. Ve'afilu hachi Hebron mevuna al achas mishiva b'tzayan. Hebron is 5 times more productive than Tzoan. And we have a cheshbon here, a calculation that lasts a few lines, and note we have a long marking to indicate that. Dichtiv. Pasuk says, "V'chevron sheva shanim nivnesa lifnei Tzoan Mitzrayim." Here we translate it literally, that the city of Hebron was built 7 years before Tzoan of Mitzrayim. Now, my nivnesa, what does that word mean? Which we translated literally. Ilemo nivnesa mamish, if it means as we translated, that literally built up. Is this normal that a person would build a house for his younger son before building for his older son? Shinemar. We mentioned sons. We have names here. We have Canaan and we have Mitzrayim. Hebron was in Eretz Canaan. So we have to think about, where do Canaan and Mitzrayim come from? So the pasuk says, Uvnei Cham. Cham was the son of Noach. Uvnei Cham, Kush u'Mitzrayim ufut u'Canaan. So we've underlined the key words, and you see the order. The sons of Cham, the second one was Mitzrayim, the fourth was Canaan. So Canaan, in which Hebron was located, was younger. So what does it mean when the pasuk says, "V'Hebron sheva shonim nivnesa lifnei Tzoan Mitzrayim, ela shemevune al achas mishiva b'tzayan"? It's 7 times greater. So now, let's make the calculation. If Tzoan Mitzrayim produced 70 kur, so Hebron, which was the poorest place in Eretz Yisrael, would produce 7 times that. That gives you 490 kur. V'hani mili b'troshim. That's true with regard to a rocky area. Aval shlo b'troshim chamesh me'ah. In a non-rocky area, so once again, in a rocky area it produced 490 kur. In an arable area it produced more, let's say 500 kur. V'hani mili shelo b'v'choiseh, and that's when it wasn't at a time of bracha. Avol b'v'choiseh, at the time of plenty of bracha. Ksiv, the pasuk says, "Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi, vayimtza b'shana hahi mea sharim." The pasuk describes Yitzchak Avinu planted and found 100 mea sharim, 100 measures. So the basic measure was 500. Now, and it's capable of producing 100 times that, 100 times 500. That gets you to the number we were looking for, 50,000 kur. Tanya, Omar Rav Yossi, Saw Yehuda Hoysa Oysa Chamesh Sa'in. A saw of Yehuda. Now, my understanding here is that a saw, once it has a measure here, it's not a land measure, but it's a volume measure of grains, of harvested grains. Saw of harvested wheat would, when you grind the wheat, when you process it, you'll come out with the following: 5 sa'in, 5 saw of product. Saw kemach. Saw solas. Kemach is a fine flour. Solas is a thicker, grainier flour. Saw subin, saw mursan, and saw kiburia. These are different, but we say byproducts like shells and peels of the that's the subin and mursan, and the kiburia is a type of flour that's not of high quality, and it's used for making something called pas kevor. The Gemara continues with a Maisa that takes a number of lines. We have a long marking for that. Amalei Ahut Tzeduki, the Rabbi Chanina. Tzeduki is a reference to a person of course a non-believer in the oral tradition. Sometimes it's a reference to idol worshippers, Gentiles, maybe early Christians, but it's referred to in the Gemara by using the term Tzeduki. So Tzeduki says from Chanina, Yoeh mishabchisu bo ba'arachon. It's fitting that you praise your land. Beiso achas inichli abo. I was left by my father an area of a beiso. Mimena meshach, mimena chamor, mimena ibor. From it I get oil. Meshach is oil. Chamor is wine. Ibor, grains. Mimena kitnios, I harvest legumes. Mimena roos miknosian. From that same base saw, my cattle is able to graze. Amalei hahu bar amoroa lebar aro d'Yisrael. There was a member of the Amorite people that said to a man of Eretz Yisrael, Hi, Tulsa, the Kaima Aguda de Yardana, Kama Gadrisu Mina. Tulsa is it's a reference here to a specific palm tree, that palm tree that stands on the banks of the Jordan. How much do you harvest, quantity-wise? How many dates do you harvest from it? Amalei Shisin Kuri, I harvest 60 kur. Amalei Akati lo Ailisu ba Achravisua. You have hardly entered the land and you've already ruined it. Anan Meo Viestrum Kuri Hava Gazrino Mino. We used to harvest 120 kur from it. Amalei, so the Ben Eretz Yisrael says back, Ano Nami Mechad Giso Kamina. I was speaking only about from one side of the tree. And I mentioned the 60 sa'ah. That is the 60 the 60 figure that I gave you, 60 kur, was only from half of it. Amar Rav Chisda, my dichtiv. We should point out, by the way, that we have a long marking on this section of Gemara that we call Eretz Yisrael is considered like a tzvi. And the nosei, the topic heading is Lom Eretz Yisrael Nim Shalom Tzvi. Why is Eretz Yisrael compared to a deer? Omar Rav Chisda, my dichtiv ve'etein loch Eretz Chemda nachlas tzvi. I'll give you a desirous land. That's the inheritance of the deer. Lom Eretz Yisrael tzvi. Why is Eretz Yisrael compared to a deer? And you see, we have a couple of approaches. Number one, Lomar Loch Ma Tzvi Ze Ein Oro Machzik Besaro. Just like the deer, when you slaughter a deer and then skin it, the skin contracts, becomes quite small, and you by looking at the skin, you'd say this couldn't possibly contain the animal. So just like the skin doesn't contain the animal, the land of Israel, because of the abundant amount of produce, it can't hold all of it. There isn't enough room to store it all. Just like the tzvi is considered the swiftest of all animals, the land of Israel is very swift in ripening its fruits. If we're comparing it to the deer, are you going to say just like the deer is swift, but its meat is not fatty, it's not rich, so too the fruits of Eretz Yisrael may ripen quickly, but they're not rich. Talmud lomar zovas chalav udvash. Shmeinim mechalav, it's richer than milk, umesukim midvash, and sweeter than honey. As we go on in the Gemara, we will notice a new marking. You see a bow tie shape, and on the side under the nosei mivneh heading, the bow tie appears, and it highlights the expression Solik L'Eretz Yisrael. These are maisim, they're stories in Amoroyim, Rav Ozer, Rav Zera, Bizman Aliyos L'Eretz Yisrael, when they came to Eretz Yisrael. It's interesting to note, we had a number of very profound, dramatic comments made by Rav Ozer in our previous shiur on Daf Kuf Yud Aleph concerning who merits coming back to life and the centrality of Eretz Yisrael. In his comments, it's interesting to note that he did not originate in Eretz Yisrael. He came from, most likely from Babylonia, came from outside of Eretz Yisrael to Eretz Yisrael. And many times that is actually the case of people who have a great deal of adoration and attachment to the land of Israel are those very people that came from outside the land of Israel. And here's a case in point. Rebbe Ozer, ki hava solik l'Eretz Yisrael, Omar, when Rebbe Ozer came to Israel, he said, Palti li mechado. There are three stages we're going to see in his comment that he was spared from something. So when I came to Israel, I was spared from one thing. If we take a look in Rashi, Palti li mechado, a little bit lower down in the Rashi from here, Nitzalti, I was saved, me'achas mehen, min haklolos ha'amuros b'mikra, from the curses that we find in the pasuk, and we'll see that very shortly as we go on in the Gemara. The Gemara continues, Beis, ki samchuhu, when he received smicha. Smicha is a tradition that's handed down from rabbi to student that entitles them to issue halachic rulings in certain areas that without the smicha, without this, we'll call this rabbinic license, he wouldn't be able to rule. So he received smicha. When that happened, Omar Palti li mitarti, I've now been spared of two curses. Ki osvuhu besodo ibor, when he participated in the calculations for establishing new months, intercalations, calculations dealing with the calendar, Palti li miklas, I was then spared of three curses. Shneimar v'hoyisa yodi el haneviim achozim shav. The Almighty declares that He will punish the false prophets. Besod ami lo yu. When what will be their curse? So it says besod ami lo yu. They won't be in the secret of the nation. What's that a reference to? Zeh sod ha'ibor. Ubiksav beis Yisrael lo yikosevu. The sod ha'ibor we mentioned, that was the intercalation. And ubiksav beis Yisrael lo yikosevu. They will not be written amongst the writ of Israel. Zeh smicha. The Al-Admas Yisrael lo yavo, and they won't come to the land of Israel. That's kimashmo. That's taken as it at face value. So that you notice that Rebbe Ozer, he did come to Eretz Yisrael, he did receive smicha, and he was a member of the Sod Ibor. So he was spared of these three curses. Rabbi Zera ki avasol Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Zera, when he arose to Eretz Yisrael, he too, we saw just recently how he was avoiding Rav Yehuda because of Rabbi Zera's interest in coming to Eretz Yisrael, where Rav Yehuda had opposed. So when he came to Eretz Yisrael, lo ashkach mavro l'mavar, he didn't find a ferry or a normal bridge with which to cross the river, the Jordan River. Nokat b'matz v'kovar. So what he did is he grabbed hold of a rope that was strung overhead and a plank that was laid across the river. It's kind of a precarious method of crossing, but he did anyway. He grabbed hold of the rope and walked on this narrow plank across the river. Omar lehu le hahu tzeduki. Here again we run into a tzeduki, a scoffer. He says to Rabbi Zera, Amal Paziza, you hasty nation, the kadmisuk b'maychu l'dnaichu, that when the Torah was given, you were very hasty. You said naaseh, that was their mouth. They said naaseh, we'll first do v'nishma, then after that we'll hear what are the instructions. That's not the normal, properly paced method of decision making. First you listen and then you accept. But the Jewish people were hasty, says the Tzeduki. It was a great secret that the Jewish people revealed, that we'll first do, and then we'll listen. Then after committing ourselves to do, then we'll hear what the instructions are. Akati bepesizuzaichu kaimisu. The Tzeduki says to Rabbi Zera, I see that you're still a hasty nation. What's the hastiness? You are coming to Eretz Yisrael, and the Rashi says, second line from the bottom, L'mayer lasis dover below ito, to rapidly do something hastily or prematurely before its time. Very interesting to note that Rabbi Zera, who acknowledges the concept of we saw the shalosh shvuos, the three oaths that we learned about on our previous on Daf Kuf Yud, we learned about the three oaths. And I should say, it's spelled to Kuf Yud Aleph from an Aleph, that the Jewish people are, according to this Agadic section of Gemara, are restrained from coming en masse in mass and in force to the land of Israel. However, and Rabbi Zera acknowledged that. On the other hand, Rabbi Zera himself was the prime example of someone who was forceful or so motivated to come to Israel, and upon his arrival, you see this scoffer telling him, you're coming before the time. What is he possibly referring to when he says before the time? It's probably as many people think, before the coming of the Moshiach. What are you doing coming to Israel before the Moshiach? And who's the speaker over here? Just note, it's a tzeduki, it's a scoffer, a non-believer, and his perception of the time to come to Israel. When the Moshiach comes, that's when a Jew comes to Israel. And again, we say a Jew on an individual basis. We're not talking about violation of the shalosh shvuos. Talking about a Jew on an individual basis. So Rabbi Zera did come before the Moshiach. What was his response to the Tzeduki? Amarle. So Rabbi Zera says, Duchta de Moshe Aaron lo zachula. If it's a matter of waiting for merit, yes, the time of Moshiach, the time of the ingathering of the exiles, but that might depend on having the merit to come. If I'm going to depend on merit, look at what that leads to. Moshe and Aaron, the most meritorious Jews that probably ever lived, they didn't merit coming to the land of Israel. If I'm going to wait for the time, which from the context of this Gemara would seem to indicate that when the time comes, it's going to be based on a merit standard. I'm not sure I'm going to have the merit. I see that people much greater than me, when relying on merit, didn't make it. So I'm coming now, which you, the Tzeduki, which you, the scoffer, the Apikuras Koifer, call before the time. How often we hear people that refer to the coming to the land of Israel, when the Moshiach comes. Just to take it's time to one should pause to think that type of attitude, or that type of approach of I'll wait for the time. Who originated that approach? Who's an author of that idea? From this Gemara, at least, it seems that it's a Tzeduki. It's a non-believer. We continue in the Gemara with expressions of love that the Amoraim showed toward Eretz Yisrael. Just before we read on the Gemara, I want to make mention of Shitas Rav Yehuda that we saw, who said, Bovel Yuvov V'shama Yoyu Ad Yom Poti. One might have got the impression that Rav Yehuda had, let's say, some kind of preeminence placed on Bovel above Eretz Yisrael. Well, heaven forbid that's not the case. Rather, Rav Yehuda himself was governed by his understanding of a pasuk, which was a divine instruction that you shall remain in Bovel. The Gemara in Brachos, in discussing the bracha that one makes on fragrant oil, introduces Shitas Rav Yehuda, who mentions that the text of the bracha has to do with Shemen Artzenu. Makes reference to the oil of the land of Israel. And the Gemara dismisses Rav Yehuda's text by saying that, well, Rav Yehuda is different. He has such a love of the land of Israel that even in formulating a bracha over oil, he can't withhold, he can't restrain himself from mentioning the land of Israel. The land of Israel, in Rav Yehuda's mind, was of primary importance. It was of utmost significance and chashivas. So one shouldn't misunderstand that particular shita that we saw before, that of Rav Yehuda, either. And here we're learning, by the way, the Talmud Bavli. The Talmud Bavli was essentially written outside the land of Israel, and look at the adoration, the love of the land of Israel that you see conveyed in these lines of Gemara. Rabbi Abba Menashek Kifi De'ako. Rabbi Abba, in coming to the land of Israel, he kissed the rocks of Akko. Akko was a port city, and he kissed the rocks there. There's another pshat that he kissed the corals that were found there. Rabbi Chanina Mesakin Maskele. Rashi at the bottom, Mesakin Maskele, Mashvel Mesakin Mishulil. There was on the roads, if there was some kind of potholes or protrusions that interfered with easy traffic, with easy access, he would repair those things. Machmas chibas haaretz. Can you just imagine a Godol Hador, Rabbi Chanina, involved with street work, with paving streets, with working with a jackhammer, trying to remove boulders and rocks that protruded? But why did he do that? Because of his love for the land. Love. It was so beloved to him. He was seeking out that no one should speak ill of even the roads of Eretz Yisrael. Rav Ami, Rav Asi, we continue at the top of Amud Beis. Rav Ami and Rav Asi, two great Gedolei Amoraim in Eretz Yisrael. Kaimi mishimsha l'tula, mitula l'shimsha. They stood up from the sun to go into the shade, and from the shade to go into the sun. And let's take a look at Rashi. Kaimi mishim shalatu Rashi at the top. Kishashemesh yigia l'mokum shein yoshvin v'gorsin. When the sun would reach, they would start learning early, at the early hours of the morning. The sun wasn't yet overhead, and as the day progressed, the sun would rise overhead and reach the place they were sitting. V'chamo mekader salem, and the sun would be beating down on them, creating heat. Oimdin mishom leishev v'tzel, they would get up and sit in the shade. Uvimei atzina, and in the cold season, oimdin minatzel v'yosh mechama, they would make sure to get up from the shade and sit in the sun. Kidei shelo yuchlu Yisrael al yeshivas Eretz Yisrael, so as not to come to a situation, to come to a position where someone would complain concerning the habitation, the dwelling in the land of Israel. It's if you were to translate this into modern terms regarding the land of Israel, it would probably be a mitzvah for a person to set up a proper air conditioning system where he lives. The air conditioner, just as an example, producing coolness in the summer and heat in the winter, so that a person should dwell comfortably. And the main thing to note here is what we've underlined in the Rashi, is that all of this is in order to avoid any words of complaint concerning inhabitants dwelling in the land of Israel. Just imagine how this is I would like to call it a kapora, a form of atonement for the Chet HaMeraglim, for the sin of the spies, a sin that we, the Jewish people, pay for till the end of time, till the final redemption. And it's our job, each one of us who are listening to the Gemara marking shiur right now, to bear this in mind, that one has to speak, when speaking about Eretz Yisrael, only positive. Unless someone has within his power the ability to correct things that need correction, and there are things that need correction, but if it's not within one's powers, one has no right to speak ill of any aspect of Eretz Yisrael. We're talking here even about the rocks in the streets, and the trees, the inanimate, and kal v'chomer ben benoshel kal v'chomer, when it comes to speaking ill of people, how sinful and how despicable a sin that in fact is. When it comes to Eretz Yisrael, one has to view Eretz Yisrael as he views a person. Eretz Yisrael is a living entity. It's not just a piece of land. It's a living entity, and as the pasuk itself says, that the land is capable of spitting out, of vomiting out those that don't belong in the land, those that the Almighty doesn't see fit to dwell in the land will cast them out. That's something that's unique to the land of Israel. It's called Eretz HaChaim, the land of the living. The land itself is alive, and hence the significance of avoiding any what we call loshen hora about Eretz Yisrael is of utmost importance. And we continue with Rabbi Chia bar Gamda, Megander ba'afra. Rabbi Chia would roll in the dirt of Eretz Yisrael. Shenemar ki rotzu avodecha es avoneha v'es afora yichonenu. Your servants desire its stones and grace its dirt. The Gemara continues with a new topic on the side. We've written Dor sheben David bo yilamdu kategora v'talmidei chachamim. The generation in which the Moshiach is due to arrive, that in that generation there will be a lot of, we could call it persecution, a lot of categoria. Rashi says, Harbe mastinim lamdim chova, people are are deprecating, are insulting, and finding guilty Talmidei Chachamim. A lot of people like that, Yamdu Aleim, will try to persecute and afflict and chastise and bring to court Torah scholars. So now the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Dor, the generation Sheben David Ba, the generation in which the Moshiach comes, Kategoria Betalmidei Chachamim. There will be this oppression of Torah sages. Ki Amriso Kamei de Shmuel Omar, when I said this to Shmuel, he said, Tziruf achar tziruf. There will be, Rashi says, Gzeros al Gzeros. There'll be negative rulings. There'll be indictments upon indictments. Shneimar v'oid bo Assyria v'shava v'hoysa levayer. Rashi says v'oid bo Assyria keshetisha hachalokim yu avudim, when 9/10 are eliminated, are destroyed. V'lo nosabar kimo asiris, when there's only 1/10 left. Aphi toshuv v'hoysa levayer, even the remnant will be subjugated and oppressed. Tani Rav Yosef Bezuzi u Bezuzi de Bezuzi. That Rashi says Shoilulim achar shoilulim. Shoilulim are plunderers. There will be plunderers that follow the plunderers, indicating times of great strife and strain for the Talmidei Chachamim. A very trying time. People that try to dedicate themselves to Torah learning, to become rabbis, rabbinic figures, will find themselves in this door, the door that the Gemara describes as Dor Sheben David Ba, will find themselves quite oppressed. That's the Gemara. Amar B'chia bar Ashi, Amar Rav. The following comment, according to Tosfos, is simply to end off, after having such a depressing note, to end off on something positive. The Marsha feels that this Memra is related to the Memra we just had, because it also deals with the Dor Sheben David Ba'abo. So he says in the future, Kol Ilone Srak Sheberetz Yisrael Shitanu Peros. All the non-fruit-bearing trees of today will in the future bear fruit. Shneimar ki eitz nosa piryo teino v'gefen nosnu chelam. Rashi points out that as far as fruit-bearing trees are concerned, the pasuk mentions the teino, the fig tree, the gefen, the vine, that they will give forth their chelam, their strength, their fruit. So, what is the eitz a reference to? Hence, the drasha of the Gemara, eitz is a reference to the non-fruit-bearing trees, that they too will bear fruits. It is interesting to note that Tosfos mentions here that v'lo ka'am li'el, that this wasn't mentioned before. I don't know to what extent when we say before it wasn't mentioned, because we did see a comment like this on Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amid Beis, 14 lines from the end. This very hopeful, promising Maimer Chazal, that even the barren trees of Eretz Yisrael will bring forth fruits. There's on a possibly homiletical level, a hopeful level, one might suggest a pshat here that this pasuk or this Maimer Chazal refers to the barren trees. There's a pasuk says ki odom eitz hasadeh. A person is considered like a tree, and there are amongst people, there are people that are filled with Torah and mitzvahs, and there are people that are barren. They're not. We saw the Gemara refer to the Amoratzim, the ignoramuses. So it could very well be, on a hopeful level, that even those people that we think or we perceive as being empty when the time comes, when the future arrives, you'll find that they too are filled with fruits and all that represents. So with the assistance, with the siyata dishmaya, with the help of the one above, we are successfully completed Maseches Kesubos with our eyes and tefillos and prayers that will be zoche to continue with the next Masechta, Maseches Nedarim, in the Daf Yomi cycle. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.